Imagine this, a marriage right on the edge, and then legal battles erupting across continents, all because of agreements signed years before.
It sounds dramatic, but it happens.
Yeah. Welcome, everyone, to The Deep Dive. This is where we take a whole bunch of sources someone sends us, and we just pull out the really crucial bits.
Giving you the shortcut, basically. Get informed without drowning in paper.
Exactly. And today, we're plunging into a really, well, fascinating and pretty personal legal fight.
Yeah, we've got the judgment document here. It's FACV 22-2013, Hong Kong Court of Final Appeal, decided back in 2014.
Okay.
And it's all about a German couple. Their marriage broke down, and they had these agreements, a prenup and a separation one.
Right.
And the big fight was, where's the divorce actually get sorted out? Hong Kong or Germany?
Ah, the classic international divorce tangle.
It really gives you a window into how the law tries to handle these super personal cross-border conflicts.
So our mission today, for you, the learner, is to kind of cut through all that legal stuff, get to the human story at the center of it. Yeah, the raw conflict.
And look at the ethics around those agreements, the prenup, the postnup. What does it all tell us about how complex international divorce can be? But, crucially, without getting lost in legalese.
Absolutely. So the main players, let's call them Zhang San, the husband, and Li Si, the wife, both German citizens.
Okay, German citizen.
Okay.
But there's a twist, right?
Right. The wife, Li Si, she'd been living in Hong Kong for ages, since 1997, became a permanent resident there.
Wow. Okay, so really established.
Definitely. And they actually got married in Hong Kong back in 2008.
But it didn't last long, you mentioned.
No, sadly not. By 2010, the marriage had effectively broken down. It was quite short-lived.
And that's when the legal fight really kicks off, the sort of external battle.
Exactly. Li Si starts divorce proceedings right there in Hong Kong, where she's living.
Makes sense.
But Zhang San, the husband, he starts a parallel process back in Germany. And this is key. He tries to get the Hong Kong case stopped.
Ah, okay. So he wants it dealt with in Germany, not Hong Kong. Precisely. And that leads us to the internal conflict. The core of it really lies in these two agreements they signed.
The ones you mentioned.
Yeah. The prenuptial agreement, signed in Germany before they married, December 2007. And then a separation agreement, also signed in Germany, September 2010, right when things were falling apart.
Okay. Two agreements, both signed in Germany. Let's maybe break down that prenup first. It sounds like there are different stories about how it even came about.
Completely different stories. Zhang San's version is that Li Si knew he'd had a prenup in his previous marriage.
Okay.
He says they talked about keeping their finances separate because, well, they both had their own money coming into the marriage.
Yeah, pre-existing wealth.
Yeah. And he claims she actually suggested the prenup, partly to protect her own stuff, but also to shield her from his business debts. Apparently, this included a big loan for, get this, a castle he'd bought from his ex-wife.
Okay. That's quite specific.
Isn't it? He also says the notary, back in Germany, explained everything clearly, the German law implications, the intention for German law to govern things.
Right. That's his side. What about Li Si? Her version sounds quite different from the outline.
Totally different. She absolutely denies suggesting it. She says he brought it up, framing it as protection for her if his business went bust. A safety net argument.
Kind of. And she really stresses she had zero independent legal advice. None at all. Plus, she points out the notary wasn't some neutral party. He was a friend of Zhang San's.
That feels significant.
It could be, yeah. And she completely disputes any talk about which country's laws would apply. Just wasn't discussed, according to her.
Wow. So completely opposing views on the why and how of the prenup. What did the agreement itself actually, stipulate? What were the terms?
Well, the core idea was keeping things separate. Assets owned before the marriage. Stayed separate. Business shares. Separate. Anything inherited or received as a gift during the marriage. Also separate.
So basically avoiding the usual marital pot. Exactly. They were specifically modifying the standard German system. It's called the community of accrued gains.
Yeah.
Normally, wealth built up during the marriage gets shared. They wanted out of that.
Okay.
But it's important to note this prenup was mainly about property rights, who owns what during the marriage, and if it ends. It wasn't really focused on, say, alimony or financial support after a divorce.
Right. That distinction is key. Okay. So fast forward a few years. 2010, the separation agreement. This sounds like where things really got heated and maybe ethically murky.
Yeah, this part of the story is pretty intense. Zhang San's account is that after some kind of public incident in London in August 2010,
Okay.
he decided, right, that's it, divorce. He told Li Si around September 4th. He says they then talked through the terms, his lawyer drafted the agreement, and she even apparently agreed to some changes written in by hand.
Sounds somewhat collaborative, his version anyway.
His version, yes. Li Si, dramatically different.
I'm sensing a pattern.
You could say that. She alleges he just abruptly announced the separation and basically demanded she sign an agreement immediately.
Demanded.
Yeah, allegedly threatening her that she'd get nothing if she refused. She claims she never even saw a draft beforehand.
Curiously. How did the signing happen then, according to her?
This is where it sounds really pressured. She says Zhang San's tax advisor picked her up, showed her the document briefly in the car.
In the car.
Yeah, on the way to the notary's office. Then, at the office, boom, it's presented for signature.
Wow.
She insists. No financial disclosure from him, no independent legal advice for her, just immense pressure. She felt completely coerced.
That sounds awful. A really troubling scenario, if true. You can just imagine the feeling of pressure.
It really paints a picture. Now, the agreement itself, what it covered, it was pretty detailed.
Okay, what did it say? Besides the alleged coercion.
Well, it revoked the old prenup. It restated the separate asset ownership idea. It let Li Si stay in their Hong Kong home until September 2012, kept her salary going until then.
Some practical arrangements then.
Yeah, some practical things. Allowed her limited use of his castle as a guest, payments for her horse, her German health insurance, even a potential payment to her parents if their castle accommodation ended.
The castle again.
Yeah.
Okay. But what about the really big stuff, like ongoing support, alimony?
Yes. That's the absolute sticking point. And where the ethical red flags really wave, there were clauses about waiving alimony claims.
Waiving. So neither party could claim support from the other later.
That was the clear intention, yes. Even though there were some translation issues presented in court, the aim was a mutual waiver. The reasoning given in the document was that they'd both be self-sufficient, financially secure, minimal pensions expected, that kind of thing.
And how did legal representation fit in?
Well, the agreement actually stated only one party would be legally represented in the divorce Zhang San, and he'd cover the costs.
Wait, only he gets a lawyer paid for by him, and she agrees to waive alimony under pressure? That seems imbalanced.
It certainly raises questions, doesn't it? Especially given her allegations about how she came to sign it.
Definitely. So this brings us to the courtroom battle itself. You mentioned he tried to stop the Hong Kong case.
Exactly. This is where the legal principle of forum nonconvenience comes in. It basically means inconvenient forum.
Okay.
Zhang San's lawyers argued Germany was the more logical, more appropriate place for the divorce. You know, the convenient forum.
And what was their reasoning? Why Germany?
Well, they pointed to the obvious. Both German citizens, family ties in Germany, his business base was primarily there.
And the agreements were signed there.
Precisely. Signed in Germany under German law, supposedly with German legal advice, at least for him. Plus, key witnesses about whether those agreements were validly made, they were likely in Germany too.
Makes sense on the surface. Did the first court buy it?
Yes, the initial court, the lower court in Hong Kong, actually agreed with Zhang San. They granted the stay, meaning Hong Kong case would halt and things would proceed in Germany. They emphasized all those connections to Germany.
Okay. But that wasn't the end of it.
Not at all. Li Si appealed. And the Court of Appeal in Hong Kong, they flipped the decision.
Really? Why?
They put much more weight on Li Si's connection to Hong Kong, her long-term residency, the fact she was a permanent resident there. They basically said she has a right to seek divorce here, and both parties do have significant ties to Hong Kong. The lower court, they felt, hadn't given those Hong Kong connections enough importance.
Interesting. So appeal court says, nope, Hong Kong is fine. Which leads us to the top court, right? The Court of Final Appeal. Why did they get involved? Usually they only take cases with big legal principles at stake.
Exactly right. It wasn't just about sorting out Zhang San and Li Si's personal dispute anymore. The case raised fundamental questions about how Hong Kong law should treat prenuptial and postnuptial agreements generally.
Ah, the wider implications.
Yeah, especially because the law in this area had been evolving. There were older cases like Edgar v. Edgar on postnups, but more recently, a huge case in the UK Supreme Court, Radmacher v. Granatino. That one dealt specifically with prenups.
Radmacher. I've heard of that. It shifted things in the UK, didn't it?
It did. It gave prenups significantly more weight than they'd had before, though still not automatically binding. The big question for the Hong Kong court was, Should we adopt the Radmacher principles here in Hong Kong, too?
So the stakes were pretty high for Hong Kong family law. What did the Court of Final Appeal decide in the end? Did the Hong Kong case proceed?
Yes, they upheld the Court of Appeal's decision. They refused Zhang San's request to stay the proceedings. The divorce would happen in Hong Kong.
And their reasoning? Why stick with Hong Kong?
Their core reasoning was that Zhang San hadn't met the high bar required. He hadn't proven that Germany was clearly and distinctly a more appropriate forum than Hong Kong.
Clearly and distinctly. That sounds like a tough test.
It is, especially when the other party, Li Si, had a clear right to sue in Hong Kong based on her residency, and they both had, substantial connections there. Her life was largely based there.
So the takeaway is that having those agreements signed in Germany wasn't enough to automatically pull the case there.
Not automatically, no. Hong Kong law, like UK law post-Radmacher, respects these agreements, but it won't just rubber stamp them, particularly if there are serious questions about fairness or how they were made. They wanted to look closely.
Right, so the Hong Kong court basically said, hold on, we need to examine this properly ourselves. What were the key things they now needed to decide in Hong Kong?
Well, first, the divorce itself. But crucially, the validity and the weight of those two agreements. Could Li Si prove her claims of coercion, lack of disclosure, lack of advice?
And if she could, if the agreements were found to be invalid or given little weight.
And the Hong Kong court would have to determine the appropriate financial relief, things like asset division, maybe maintenance under Hong Kong law, regardless of what the German agreements said.
This really brings us back to that idea of conflicting stories, doesn't it? The lie shattering a family.
Absolutely. Those wildly different accounts of how the prenup and separation agreement happened, that's the heart of the breakdown, beyond just the marriage itself. Allegations of pressure, manipulation versus claims of mutual understanding.
And the court deciding to hear the case in Hong Kong feels like a step towards trying to uncover which version holds water.
I think so. It suggests a need to dig into the facts, hear the evidence within their own system, and find the truth of how those agreements came to be before deciding their effect.
It really throws a spotlight on the ethical side of things too, doesn't it?
Definitely. You've got potential power imbalances in the relationship, serious allegations about pressure, about one party maybe not having the chance to get proper advice.
Yeah, the whole notary being a friend thing, the tax advisor pickup.
Exactly. And the real risk that sticking rigidly to those agreements could leave one person, in this case allegedly Li Si, at a huge disadvantage.
And this is where the Radmacher principles, which the court confirmed do apply in Hong Kong, become so important, right?
Precisely. The court made it clear.
Yep.
Yes, we follow Radmacher. Prenups, and by extension postnups, aren't automatically binding like a commercial contract, but they carry significant weight, IF, and it's a big if. If they were entered into freely, voluntarily, with both parties fully understanding the implications, and crucially, without undue pressure or funny business.
But even if all those boxes are ticked, can the court still step in?
Yes, and this is vital. The court keeps the power to override an agreement if upholding it would be unfair in the actual circumstances of the divorce.
Unfair how? Like, if someone's situation has drastically changed.
Exactly. Or if one party is genuinely struggling financially while the other is very wealthy. The court looks at fairness at the time of the divorce, not just when the paper was signed. It's about achieving a just outcome.
So it's a balance between respecting people's agreements and ensuring fairness when things fall apart.
That's the tightrope walk. And the court also drew a slight distinction, didn't they, between the type of agreement in this case versus Radmacher.
How so?
Well, the prenup here was mostly about changing the default German property regime, the community of accrued gains, how assets were owned during the marriage.
Right, keeping things separate.
Whereas agreements like the one in Radmacher were more directly about settling financial claims after the divorce, like alimony waivers. The separation agreement here tried to do that too, which is why the coercion claims are so critical for that part.
Got it. It's a subtle but important legal difference.
Mm-hmm.
Did they mention anything about getting money later, even if the divorce happened in Germany?
Briefly, there's a provision in Hong Kong law, Part CIA of an ordinance, that sometimes allows someone to seek financial relief in Hong Kong after a foreign divorce.
Oh, interesting. So she might have had another shot anyway.
Potentially. But the court noted the criteria are really strict. It wasn't seen as a good enough safety net to justify stopping the main Hong Kong case.
Yeah.
They wanted to deal with it head on.
Okay, that makes sense. They wanted control over ensuring a fair outcome from the start.
Seems that way.
So let's pull this together. Key takeaways from this deep dive. What have we learned?
Well, I think it really rams home how incredibly complex international divorce can be. Different laws, different systems.
Exactly.
And it shows just how pivotal these pre- and postnuptial agreements are. But also, crucially, how courts, at least in places like Hong Kong and the UK now, grapple with their validity. It's not just about ticking legal
The
boxes.
circumstances matter hugely.
Hugely. The Hong Kong court really prioritized its connection, Lisi's residency, the need to scrutinize how those agreements were made.
And hopefully, for you, the learner, we've kind of navigated that legal maze, focusing on the human story, the ethics, without getting lost in the weeds.
Yeah, trying to understand the core issues.
And that theme, a lie shatters a family truth, finishes it. It feels relevant here, doesn't it?
It really does. Those conflicting stories, the allegations, it's like the truth of what actually happened with those agreements is the key to resolving the whole thing.
And the Hong Kong proceedings, in a way, represent that search for the truth. The process needed to, hopefully, eventually, finish the shattering.
Hopefully bring some kind of closure, yeah, based on a clearer picture of the facts.
So here's something for you listening to chew on. Think about power dynamics in relationships. We see potential signs of it here. To what extent should agreements, maybe made when one person feels less powerful or less informed, dictate everything years later when the relationship ends?
It's a tough question.
And how can people really protect themselves, make sure they understand everything, especially when you've got different countries' laws potentially in play?
It highlights the need for good, independent advice, doesn't it, for both parties?
Absolutely. And let's throw out a debate question for you all. Get involved. Let us know what you think.
Okay, let's hear it.
Should prenuptial agreements always be upheld if they look okay on paper, signed, witnessed, the basic formalities met? Or should courts always keep a wide discretion to look at fairness, look at how the agreement was actually made, even if it was signed ages ago?
Formalities versus fairness, essentially.
Yeah, exactly. Where should the balance lie? Jump onto our social media, find the poll, share your thoughts. We'd love to hear your take.